Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. While 2016 had a fair amount of good things happen within the games industry, it also had a fair amount of controversy, which left us with some interesting events that were good in some cases and downright disgusting in others. Greed, moral bankruptcy, fanboyism, and downright idiotic behavior runs rampant in the gaming industry at large, and we have had no shortage of controversies as a result. Now, I've reported on quite a few of these controversies that have come out of this past year, and I've felt my own fair share of disgust and appall at the actions and behaviors of others. All these issues that seem to crop up on a near constant basis remind me of some exceptionally wise words that I first heard spoken to me by my 7th grade history teacher in response to my complaints about the usefulness of the subject matter. She said to me, "You may not see it now, but trust me, you will come to realize the truth in this. History is vital to the growth of humanity as a whole. Our entire species depends on it. Because without learning about history, we never learn from our mistakes. Without learning from history, it will be doomed to repeat itself. In history, as in everything else in life, we must remember where we came from in order to better see where we're going." And while I did think those words rather trite at the time and failed to fully grasp their importance, they did resonate with me on a certain level. Now, I exercise that same wisdom here by remembering the mistakes that were made and the insults offered both from and sometimes to the games industry. Also, in light of the subject matter, I feel that in this top 10 list, we'll do things in order of severity, with the number one spot being given to the controversy that was the most despicable, the most horrendous, and the most damaging to the gaming community as a whole. And I will also present at least a brief synopsis, although probably none of them could be considered brief, on my thoughts on the subjects of each one. So without any further ado, I present to you these, the top 10 biggest gaming controversies of 2016. Number 10.
There you are.
Psst, what are you looking at?
Now, the issue regarding the Overwatch character Tracer's posterior is definitely what I would call a non-controversy, meaning that it is so ridiculous, so idiotic that it shouldn't even count as a controversy at all. However, this is what happens when a vocal minority gets offended over something innocuous, and the corporation bows to the whim of that minority. The issue in question surrounds, as previously stated, the character Tracer from Overwatch, a first-person team-based competitive shooter by Blizzard Entertainment. Specifically in regards to her over-the-shoulder victory pose in which her form-fitting outfit showcases her backside. The Overwatch player known as Phipps filed the initial complaint to Blizzard stating that it over-sexualized Tracer and was not in keeping with her character type. And this of course spawned a giant furball of discussion amongst fans of the game, some weighing in on the side of Phipps, others against. However, this prompted Blizzard to remove the pose from the game entirely, stating that they want the game to be for everyone. Which is a nice sentiment. But does this mean that if I complain about the sexualization of Widowmaker that her assets will be changed as well? What about Mercy's Halloween costume? What if I complain that Roadhog being forced to wear a mask is fat-shaming, or that Diva's skin-tight bodysuit leaves too little to the imagination? You see, it's laudable for the developers to want to make sure that the game is acceptable for anyone and everyone. I have absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. I like the fact that they want to be that accessible. But it is a dangerous tightrope to walk what all of the before-mentioned complaints could easily be raised by ridiculously oversensitive people. If that is a road that Overwatch travels, then they clearly do not see that it is one that will lead to bitter disappointment. Reason being that if Overwatch gets wrapped up in attempting to please everyone, then they'll end up pleasing no one. A perfect example of what I'm talking about is The Elder Scrolls Online, a game that tried so hard to please opposite ends of the spectrum to the point where the game clearly suffered to the point where many, myself included, found it to be a boring chore of a game with no real multiplayer aspects, which is utterly unforgivable in an MMO. And while I personally couldn't care less about whether or not the victory pose stayed or went, it set a dangerous precedent for an extreme minority to effect artistic changes in a video game that relies heavily on its characterizations. Number 9.
It's a lot to take in, kid. Where do I even start? You've been out of the game for a long time. Or maybe I need to remind you the kind of people we'd be crossing here.
Now, I recall vaguely hearing about this one only in passing. As this is a PC gaming focused channel, I typically don't spend too much time paying attention to Xbox or PlayStation exclusives. However, I did recall something about this, and so I decided to do a little bit of investigatory work, and what I found appalled me. I wish I could say shocked, but after this year, I feel ready to believe just about anything. So earlier this year, Uncharted 4 released 2 rave reviews. 10 out of 10s were being thrown around like confetti on a parade day. However, there was one review that stuck out amongst the rest. It was a Washington Post review that was posted on Metacritic, giving the game a 40 out of 100. This, of course, brought down the fanboy hordes upon Metacritic, the Washington Post, and the author of the review like a ton of bricks. Many demanding the low review be removed and that the author be made to apologize for rating Uncharted 4 such a low score. There was even a Change.org petition to have the review removed, citing that it, quote, harms the flawless reputation of the game, and also stating a review is not about what you think a game is, it's about what a game is. Objective measures are applied. A petition that Nathan Drake's voice actor, Nolan North, himself signed. Now, I do feel I have to weigh in here, and please bear with me as I thoroughly piss off a bunch of fanboys about their favorite shiny thing. I read the review, and while it was definitely not how I would review a game, and it did not speak much to the mechanics and the gameplay, it was still a review nonetheless. And from that standpoint, it was well written, well articulated, and I feel that unequivocally, 100% beyond a shadow of doubt, that nothing should be done to remove or alter the review in any way, shape, or form. And for those of you that haven't automatically moved on, I will explain why. Now, the creator of the petition stated one thing that is patently false. A review is not about what you think a game is, it is about what a game is. Objective measures are applied. Now, this is so far from the truth that it's nearly comical. Of course, a review is about what you think a game is. It is a subjective composition in every definition of the word. True, some reviewers like myself do attempt to include objective principles when analyzing a game based on our own criteria. But at the end of the day, it's just that, our own criteria. A purely subjective definition or list of points that a game is measured up against in order to determine if it meets our own personal standards of being a good game or not. This is not a purely objective impersonal action. By its very nature, it is a subjective definition and decision-making process. That is what a reviewer does. We offer up our own thoughts and impressions of a game in such a way as to relate that impression to you, the viewer, so that you are able to make an opinion based either in whole or in part upon the information and relation of personal experience within the game. That is where our job ends. It is most definitely not a dispassionate analysis of the game with no personal thought or impression entered into it. If that were the case, then reviews would be completely and utterly without point. One would only need to fill out a checklist, and once you got to the end, then it could be determined, this is now a good game. An act that would, to be honest, take the heart and soul out of gaming at its very core, because without that personal flair, without that subjective opinion that is based on thought, feeling, and intellect, then what we would be left with is a flat scoring system that you can bet your ass would be manipulated by the game's publishers of the world to ensure a maximization of profits whilst decreasing effort to ludicrous levels. It is that subjective opinion of the gaming critic that helps the consumer make a better informed decision before they spend their money, to warn consumers away from shoddy products and to help steer them towards games that are worthwhile. Pouring one's heart and soul into the reviews in order to make sure they do their best for their readers or their viewers, as few understand better than a critic how important their audiences are to their continued survival. Much the same that games publishers very much fight against the ideals of an informed consumer base, shoving pre-order culture and season passes down the throats of gamers with the promise of some trifle in order to ensure they part you and your money when the product is continued on sight unseen. So should the review be removed? Is it a travesty and a marring of Uncharted 4's flawless reputation? No, absolutely not. It should be left exactly where it is, and people should be allowed to make their own decisions on whether or not to listen to the words of the author. Now, I'm reminded of a quote from Star Trek, and given that I am indeed a giant nerd and a geek all at once, I will relate it to you now. With the first link, the chain is forged. The first speech censured, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably. To take down the review would be to not only censure and silence an article in the free press, it would be very much be turning the review into forbidden thought and word. Silencing a published criticism is but a single step down a dangerous road that will ultimately not end well for anyone. It will set us upon the path where free speech is not only denied, but derided. This sets us towards the path where the only acceptable reviews are positive ones, which will completely and forever destroy the possibility of an informed consumer base within the games industry. And with that, the dominoes will continue to fall until we are finally at a place where the games publishers can do literally whatever the hell they want, and woe to those that would dare attempt to stand in their way. This is a path that so many gamers would want to set us on by silencing the criticism of that reviewer. And it is most definitely not the path I want to be on. Number 8. In March of 2016, Microsoft announced their push to link Xbox and Windows PC gamers together under one umbrella using the Universal Windows platform. And what this would allow for is people that purchase games on the Microsoft Store would have access to those games on Xbox and on the PC, and would also allow for cross-platform play for certain games. It will also allow for several development tools specific to the Universal Windows platform for developers. That sounds pretty great, right? Well, no, not if you're a PC gamer. You see, in the midst of all of these supposed great things that Windows brings to the table for the games development ecosystem, there is a giant demon lurking in the midst. Now, many games developers have decried the platform for having key options buried deeply and possibly intentionally in an attempt to curtail the use of certain options within their games. It has also been stated by developers that it removes them from the equation when it comes to interacting with their consumers directly. However, my concern ultimately isn't with Microsoft or the Windows platform or even with games developers. It has always been and will always be with you, the consumer. And when one asks, is this a good thing for the consumer? Ultimately, the answer is going to be no. Absolutely not. You see, there is and has been one thing that makes PC gaming so wonderful when compared to console gaming. It's a fact that there is choice. With PC, you aren't locked into a single platform for purchasing games. You aren't even locked into a single operating system, let alone method of control. You can use controllers. You can use a keyboard and mouse. You can use a joystick. You can use Linux, Ubuntu, Windows, Mac OS even. There are so many different options that PC gaming offers you that are not available to console consumers. And it is that ability to choose that the Microsoft UWP threatens the most. You see, with consoles, exclusivity is key. It limits consumer choice and forces them in many instances to simply accept what is being handed them and be happy about it. Case in point, the Xbox Live membership fees that Xbox gamers must pay to be able to simply play games online. A completely unnecessary, despicable, and utterly unforgivable paywall Microsoft imposes on its console consumers. However, with PC, there has been no real way to impose exclusivity owing to its openness in general. So what Microsoft has now been making a push for yet again is a form of distribution exclusivity, limiting consumers to the Windows App Store or Windows Marketplace. The distribution exclusivity limits consumer choice to extreme degrees, and by doing so helps limit consumer power and protection. With the extreme diversity to third-party distribution that PC currently enjoys, consumers have the power to vote with one of the most powerful voices that they have, their wallets. This helps keep games publishers to adhere to occasional semblances of honesty and helps keep prices from reaching ridiculous levels. And we can see the result of that simple freedom by virtue of costs of gaming and game variety and selection on PC versus games prices and availability on consoles. And no, this is not a PC master race rant. This is a warning of what Microsoft continues to fight for. Make no mistake, Microsoft has been driving for this since the days of Windows Vista, with the Windows Live Store in multiple different incarnations. It is merely to turn the PC gaming platform into a proprietary exclusive platform where consumers have no choice but to accept what is given them. In short, they are attempting to turn PC into a console. Number 7.
My hatred burns through the cavernous deeps.
Nostalrius was a fan-run World of Warcraft server that hosted a vanilla version of the game, sporting the game's playable state in its early days, before any expansions. In April of 2016, Blizzard exercised their legal copyright on the Warcraft franchise and presented Nostalrius with a cease and desist letter. Nostalrius and Blizzard did enter into what eventually turned out to be fruitless talks, and the private server was eventually shut down. Now, this did cause a good amount of public outrage, and yes, everyone agrees that Blizzard was within their legal right, but are still extremely angry. Many YouTubers, including JonTron and Boogie2988, have stated that if Blizzard won't do it, why not let Nostalrius do it? And the reason for that is quite simple. It doesn't matter whether they want to allow Nostalrius to continue or not. They quite literally can't allow it to continue. You see, copyright law is tricky, and dealing with copyright law when in regards to intellectual property is even trickier. And in the case of maintaining your rights to your own IP, it's very much a case of use it or lose it. It is this very reason why games publishers defend their legal rights when in regards to their intellectual property with such vociferous tenacity. There have been instances of a company not protecting its intellectual property properly and ended up losing their rights to their own product to a competitor. These kinds of things can and will happen, and by Blizzard not defending their legal rights to the World of Warcraft IP, they would open themselves up to a potential danger of having that happen. Imagine how devastating that would be to Blizzard, to lose the rights to one of their most venerated flagship IPs. What if that were suddenly owned by Konami or Activision or Capcom? Imagine what it would do to Blizzard's financial status. It is something that Blizzard not only won't, but can't take a risk about, and for once, I completely agree with the publisher. But only insofar as the protection of their IP is concerned. Make no mistake, Blizzard execs have said some mighty douchey things in regards to vanilla WoW, stating that they don't want it and you don't either, when over 800,000 people created accounts on the Nostalrius server, and there were still over 150,000 active players. I wouldn't call that fans not wanting to play vanilla WoW. What I would call that would be a small but active player base. Now, what Nostalrius can teach us is that there is definitely a great many people out there that have become disenfranchised over the current state of World of Warcraft and wish to return to when they believed the game to be good, when they believed the game designed to be at its height. Blizzard was well within their right and should indeed defend their intellectual property. However, it amazes me that Blizzard didn't take the simple solution that would protect their IP, earn them some money, and make them come out looking like heroes in this situation. The simple answer was to buy Nostalrius, absorb it in such a way that these fans that ran the server are now getting paid to do the same thing under the Blizzard banner. And I can guarantee that fans would pay to keep the vanilla WoW going. And the fans would then get a Blizzard run and sanctioned vanilla WoW server that they could play on to their heart's content. Now this makes the Nostalrius incident one of Blizzard's dumbest mistakes. Number 6. On October 25th, Gary Steinman released a statement on Bethesda.net stating that Bethesda would continue the practice they learned from Doom of releasing review code precisely one day before launch, stating that they wish everyone, including those in the media, to experience their games at the same time. In a few short sentences, Bethesda caused an immediate uproar, most decrying the action as blatantly anti-consumer, while some few, such as the case with Mundane Matt, a fellow YouTuber, actually claimed that it wasn't a bad thing and that they didn't mind. And as everyone is entitled to their own opinion, I won't spend the next few minutes berating a YouTube news analyst who isn't here to defend himself or his position. I will instead reiterate to you the same sentiments that I expressed in my news video in regards to Bethesda's actions. What Bethesda is doing here is wrong. It is greedy, it is manipulative, it is underhanded, and it is disgustingly anti-consumer at its very core. What Bethesda is doing here is very much attempting to limit information on their games in order to help drive pre-order and day one sales. Why, you might ask? Well, I will tell you, voice in my head. It's because it is that availability of information that allows consumers to make an informed decision that reviewers and critics provide. To a certain extent, even Let's Players have an active role in relating accurate information to the consumer as well as according to how the game plays and what the gameplay mechanics are like. Take away the ability for critics to review your games before they come out, and you find yourself to be in a very powerful position. Just as Bethesda now controls the information directly, so do they control the narrative surrounding that information. This leaves any feedback that critics can relate to consumers to be virtually powerless, toothless in the face of the rampant pre-order culture that is the bane of any educated gamer. And also, to rub salt into the wound, Bethesda basically all but outright said in their posting, "Look at Doom. Doom was great, so you can trust us with Skyrim Remastered and Dishonored 2, both of which had horrendous issues at launch that initially went largely unreported due to a lack of review copies being distributed. Reviewers like myself attempted to get the word out as quickly as we could, but in the end, it was too little too late, and Bethesda is left fusroidine all the way to the bloody bank. And given that this action served to only benefit Bethesda, one has to wonder whether or not they were aware that Dishonored 2 and Skyrim Remastered was going to be released in such a deplorable state. It is definitely conceivable, given the timelines, which would make Bethesda's actions not only self-serving and anti-consumer in nature, but blatantly dishonest as well, which is a shame given Bethesda's pedigree. Bethesda used to be one of the publishers that consumers were able to trust. The publisher that was consumer-friendly. They even packaged modding tools on disk with Morrowind, and the tools were made readily available with Oblivion and Skyrim. Bethesda used to have the trust of gamers as a whole for years based upon their actions and their distinguished history of putting the gamer first. It was because of that history, that reputation, that gamer-friendly behavior of Bethesda that allowed them to release their games in such buggy states, to the extent that random bugs and glitches are synonymous with a Bethesda title. And it was that understanding of Bethesda that allowed most gamers to overlook that flaw with a smile. However, Bethesda themselves have changed the lay of the land, as it were. With this action, Bethesda has shown with crystal clarity that they no longer deserve that respect or that trust. Yes, Doom was a critical success and for all intents and purposes was a fantastic single-player experience. But Bethesda fails to realize that Doom's success does not translate to other titles. In this industry, it is becoming more and more true that you are only as good as your most recent title. Bethesda used to enjoy an exception to that rule. However, now, Bethesda will begin to be treated more and more like Activision, Capcom, EA, and all the rest. And they did this to themselves knowingly. Unfortunately, the issue remains that most likely the only people that will be hurt by Bethesda's decisions is the consumer. Sorry, Bethesda, but you broke the trust. Now, one can only hope that you will suffer the consequences of your actions. But only time will tell. Number 5. As many of you are no doubt aware, this year saw a rash of games released in what could be considered kindly as less than optimal. Still touting full microtransactions, paid DLC, and season passes, the money machine that is the AAA gaming industry was running full steam this year, and there was one coal-burning, black lung-inducing poison cloud of a game that rose above the rest of its cohorts to a position of proud infamy: Street Fighter V. Now, Street Fighter V, whose original release date was in February of 2016, was pushed out into the eagerly waiting hands of the consumer at a full retail price of $60 with a $30 season pass. Now, what was most notable about the game was the seeming lack of an actual game. Rushed to the market, Street Fighter V unapologetically posted IOUs where the goddamn game was actually supposed to be in order to get the base product out in time for the pro gaming scene. And on top of that, what little content that actually was presented in the game at launch was absolutely underwhelming, to say the very least. The most cursory, backhanded single-player experience I've ever gotten from a AAA title, Street Fighter V was nothing short of an abomination. A blight upon the games industry that should be purged in fire at every turn. The state of the game at release was beyond appalling, showing how always online DRM is a horrendous idea. And while that may have been enough for many for Street Fighter V to make this list, Capcom is never one to leave well enough alone. Capcom, in their infinite wisdom and blatant disregard for consumer protection or United States law, introduced a mandatory anti-cheat patch for Street Fighter V that included a DLL file that was implanted into the System32 folder of the Windows operating system. This was an intentionally introduced rootkit virus that created an open backdoor into the operating system that allowed system-level access to the entire computer. Now, Capcom issued a rollback on the patch once consumers discovered the offending malware. However, the rollback did not remove the virus from the infected computers. Also, it was found that simply uninstalling the game did not, in fact, remove the virus from the computer either. A few Redditors did create a way to safely remove the virus and were kind enough to create a step-by-step guide for those that were able to find a link for the subreddit. Showing a blatant disregard for anything outside of their own interests in multiple ways with Street Fighter V, Capcom has earned the right to be confirmed as most definitely one of the shittiest games publishers of 2016, if ever. Unfortunately, it is doubtful those who decided that introducing the virus was a good thing will ever face any consequences for their law-breaking actions, but one can only hope. Number 4. Early access can be very much a double-edged sword. With less than 30% of the titles released into early access ever actually reaching completion, these games are what can be considered a gamble at the best of times. However, conversely, there are a great many games that never would have come into existence without the early access program. But has it done more harm than good? A controversy and outrage burst out of Steam like an avalanche when it was announced that Ark: Survival Evolved, a game that is still to this day in early access, released a $20 DLC package. And in spite of the DLC package reaching number 1 on Steam for a time, it was still met with a large community backlash. Now, the developers, of course, stated that releasing the DLC with the game still in early access makes it easier to integrate with the base game, having completely missed the point, or deliberately dodging it. I'm not quite sure which. Now, I look at this and I find myself asking one very important question. How is anyone honestly deluded enough into thinking this is in fact a good thing? An early access title means that people are granted access to your game before it is finished, and in return, they pay you money to be used for the development of the game. However, what we have here is a clear indication of the developers taking the money that was paid for the development of the base game and turning around and using those funds, not to mention the time that should have been spent on the base game, to build an expansion for that same unfinished title in order to charge you even more money. Am I the only one here seeing the snake eating its own tail? Not only is this anti-consumer, but it is amoral, dishonest, deceitful, and wholly unethical. These developers took money that was paid them in good faith for a product. And what did they do with that? They made something else using that money to sell back to those same consumers. And so many bloody people bought the goddamn thing that it wound up on the #1 spot on Steam. I weep for the future of humanity. I really do. Now, unfortunately, it is the state of the gaming industry as a whole that has led us to this point where so many people actually believe this kind of behavior is okay. And much of it is due to societal and industry norms. We're in a world where everything, literally everything, is on demand. Quite literally to the point where people pay for and play video games before they are finished being worked on. So much so to the point that many people that currently play Ark right now will have moved on to something else before the game is even completed. They will never see what the game is like once it has been finished being worked on. And it is that mindset, that cultural acceptance of incomplete products, that allows activities like these to not only be accepted, but to flourish. There's no question in that the actions made by the Ark development team are extremely damaging to the industry, but I can't lay all of the blame at their feet. By virtue of the vast quantity of people that willingly paid them money for this blatant misappropriation of funds earned in good faith, it will embolden these developers and others to not only continue, but it will bolster their resolve to push the envelope even further, to see what more they can get away with and be praised for it. Now, this particular controversy denotes a serious lack of consideration by so many of the gaming community that it definitely shines a light on where the industry could head if gamers continue to buy into such double-dealing practices. While this controversy was not higher on the list due to the overall potential damage that it could cause to the gaming industry, it shines a light more onto the mindset of the early access adopters that many might think. And it is yet one more reason why I will continue to speak out against such unethical practices. Number 3. See, I bet almost all of you thought that Digital Homicide was for sure going to be #1 on my list. And you wouldn't have been wrong except for one simple factor. The placing on these lists are in order of how damaging they are or potentially damaging they are to the games industry and or consumers as a whole. And while Digital Homicide could easily be classified as cancer for your PC and your brain, they ultimately proved to be utterly toothless thanks to the pure delusional state of the more vocal brother James Romine. But for those of you that haven't been following my channel, and for those that need a refresher, allow me a brief synopsis on a topic that was covered extensively on my channel. Many know about the kerfuffle that was the Jim Sterling review of Slaughtering Grounds, a title by Digital Homicide. In that review, Jim Sterling tore the game to shreds and left its bleeding, broken husk lying on the ground to slowly expire. In retaliation, the brothers Romine released a Review the Reviewer video, which was Jim Sterling's video with text over the top criticizing him, his intellect, and his ability to play games. From this video, Jim garnered the now popular phrase, Jim fucking Sterling's son. Soon after, as things escalated, Digital Homicide even attempted a DMCA takedown of Jim Sterling's video, which for those of you that are not familiar with the DMCA takedown, this is quite literally the worst thing you can do to a YouTube channel, because YouTube's copyright rules dictate that DMCA takedowns are very much a 3 strikes and you're out. With 3 DMCA takedown notices or 3 clear copyright violations of such egregious nature, your channel goes away forever. Now, this has happened to a great many YouTube channels over the years, and not all of them just. Sometimes channels have been deliberately attacked by games developers in just such a fashion. Now, after a while, James Romine filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Jim Sterling for slander, defamation, and loss of revenue. I did naturally report on this and decided to show a bit of fair play to the brothers Romine and attempted to review their games myself. The cavalcade of shit and bile that flowed into my brain from that single ill-considered decision still haunts my very nightmares, and it took a lot of soul-searching to force myself to stop drinking before I became a full-blown alcoholic because of these games. Now, those games were quite literally the absolute worst thing I have ever had the misfortune of experiencing in my life. But after a while, the furor on my channel seemed to die down, and peace was returned to SidAlpha Land. For a time. Now, right around the breakout of the Ark Scorched Earth controversy, I received a comment from a YouTube viewer that goes by the moniker Iridos, which contained a link to a lawsuit that James Romine was filing in order to pursue lawsuit against 100 Steam users for slander, harassment, defamation, and a host of other accusations. I, of course, posted a video reporting on this and called upon all of my viewers and other YouTubers that I have connections to and did my best to spread the word. And the word spread like wildfire, being picked up by much larger channels and publications all over the internet, including The No, PC Gamer, Lord Crocosquirrel, and Kotaku, to name but a few. Word spread far and wide, opposition was immediately formed, and work was being done, should it become necessary, to launch a GoFundMe for the Steam defendants accused to pay for a proper legal defense. Now, it all came to naught, however. James Romine's last gasp lash-out turned into a whimper, and he slowly sunk away, beaten by his own delusions and misconceptions about how reality works. Still, Digital Homicide introduced some aspects that could be exceptionally dangerous for the gaming community. The main thing being that Digital Homicide actually went so far as to attempt legal action in order to silence criticism, to wield the law like a hammer to attempt to strike down those that James Romine perceived to be his enemies. Those things would all cause the eventual complete silencing of any criticism within the games industry if they were allowed to succeed. For so many reasons that I've already talked about in this video alone, that could be the worst thing to happen to gaming in the past 20 years. Now, I'm glad that Digital Homicide is gone, but never forget the lessons of what might have been had James Romine been just a little more cunning and a little less deluded. Number 2. Perhaps one of the biggest lies ever uttered in gaming history, No Man's Sky was the perfect storm of industry hype. With word and excitement over the potentials of the game reaching Olympian levels without the game ever being seen by anyone, No Man's Sky had made so many promises that there was quite literally a Reddit page dedicated to the promise made and never delivered in the game at release. And that list reached extensive levels, multiple pages, and citing fantastic amounts of detail. If I can find the link, I will post it in the video down below. This entire mess could easily be dumped squarely in the lap of Sean Murray, Hello Games, and Sony Entertainment, but there's one place where blame has yet to be cast, and me never being one to shy away from being truthful and honest to my viewers, it is in fact the hallmark of my channel. I will lay it before your feet now. And no one actually blames the consumer. Now, you see, while yes, any blame you thrust towards Sean Murray and Hello Games is completely justified, it seems no one has bothered to stop and consider, how did we get to this point? You see, the hype train most definitely requires fuel, and it gets that fuel by way of media attention and pre-orders, something the consumer fed it in spades. Even in spite of what turned out to be extremely valid performance concerns on the PC launch of the game, pre-orders for No Man's Sky reached ridiculous levels, and it seemed that everyone in the world had No Man's Sky fever. And all of this occurred with the actual game being, for all intents and purposes, sight unseen. No Man's Sky shows us how well the game's publishers can manipulate the gaming community. The now commonly coined No Man's Lie should never have reached such Herculean levels of hype and excitement. From an indie title from a little-known small development team, consumers very much bought into the potential that the game represented, and unfortunately, thanks to the lies of Sean Murray, the incompetence of Hello Games, and the willingness of the consumer to buy into those same lies, No Man's Sky turned from a promising title to a very clear warning. This is what pre-order culture and buying into the hype can bring. This is what games critics and reviewers like myself fight so very hard to prevent. And this is exactly what happens when people check their common sense at the door and allow their emotions to overrule their sensibilities. Number 1.
And we found this new site called CSGO Lotto. So I'll link it down in the description if you guys want to check it out. But we were betting on it today, and I won a pot of like $69 or something like that. So it was a pretty...
Special congratulations to Team Martin and Pro Syndicate. You are the winners for being the biggest douchebags on the internet and the creators of the singularly most damaging gaming controversy of 2016. For those of you that aren't aware, Team Martin and Pro Syndicate are popular YouTubers that have heavily promoted gambling on the website CSGO Lotto, where people gamble weapon skins that are worth real-world money without disclosing they were the owners and founders of that same gambling site. Now, this controversy broke, and it really shed a light into the whole CSGO gambling scene. Dozens of websites use an API to integrate with Steam in order to facilitate the trading of the gambling skins. Now, these skins are acquired through the purchasing of loot crate keys in CSGO using Steam as a backbone. Now, while this failure to disclose normally would result in yet another simple YouTube controversy, Team Martin and Pro Syndicate's connection to the website CSGO Lotto is an entirely different monster. In the video where T. Martin claimed he, quote, found a new site, what he was deliberately doing and what they continued to do was to go out of their way to dupe and manipulate their viewers, who total in the millions, into gambling on the site. Many of those viewers were indeed under the age of 18 years, which makes what they were doing not only completely and utterly amoral, but illegal as well. You see, Team Martin and Pro Syndicate and their ilk operated under what was a somewhat legal gray area, which allowed them to begin operations as a gambling site that does not deal in real-world goods or money, and are not as heavily restricted. However, their website did very clearly and exclusively deal with digital goods that do have a real-world dollar value attached to them. Some CSGO skins value in the thousands of dollars, and this gambling site clearly stated that it allowed players 13 years of age and up. Now, the simple fact that these people knowingly and deliberately duped their own viewership, not to mention impressionable children and teens, in order to line their own pockets while profiting on the ad revenue generated from their now highly questionable videos where they made appearances of gambling on a site that they owned and operated, is extremely abhorrent to most other YouTubers and gamers. CSGO Lotto's owners and officers profited heavily from directed lies and deception directed at a viewer base that totaled over 10 million people in all. The attempted continuation of the deception took the form of a T. Martin video where he claimed that his ownership of CSGO Lotto was never a secret and that anyone was welcome to check the videos for themselves. This statement followed on the back of his updating each and every one of those videos to add a disclaimer in a belated and transparent act at attempting to feign legitimacy, even going so far as to asking people how they could sleep at night after perpetuating such lies. Well, I have to ask you, Trevor Martin, how the fuck can you sleep at night, sir? How can you come to grips with the fact that you deliberately duped your entire viewership? How do you reconcile all of these duplicitous actions? Trevor Martin and Thomas Castle are quite literally the scum of the earth, and they deserve to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. As well, one could hope and dream that their channels and livelihoods built on the back of lies and lawlessness are wiped from existence entirely. Even at that, it is still far better than they deserve. Part of the reason why the actions undertaken by these two pieces of tuberculotic sputum are so dangerous and damaging is the simple fact of how they went about it. Being a YouTuber in any way with any form of following denotes a certain amount of celebrity. It is a situation where you are putting yourself into the public eye, and in the doing so, you do garner fans and followers, people that trust you, your personality, and what you have to say. And it is something that can be very easy to take advantage of if one is not careful, or in the case of these two clowns, if one simply does not care. It is a responsibility, and one that many take with the utmost seriousness. Even if they're a comedic channel, they still take it seriously. However, people like these two flaunt that advantage and that trust and bend it to their own designs and to their own benefit. It is the violation of that trust to so many people for nothing more than profit that is so damaging. It gives YouTubers everywhere and the Counter-Strike Global Offensive community a bad name and casts them in a negative light to others. I can only hope that everyone learns from the actions of these two and that they disappear lost and forgotten to rot in some jail cell, never to return. So there it is, the top 10 controversies of 2016, and man, What a year. It seems idiots and assholes absolutely came out of the woodwork. But now, we have a whole new year with whole new opportunities, both good and bad. I hope you enjoyed this video because it was actually a very interesting exercise to make. Don't forget to like and share. If you're new to the channel and somehow survived the length of the video, then please do us all a favor and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I am SidAlpha. Have a happy and safe 2017. Hey folks, thanks again for watching. If you're interested in some more reviews or first impressions, feel free to click on the window on the left. If you're interested in news affecting the gaming community, the link on the right will take you to that. If you're interested in staying up to date on what happens with the channel, the links to my Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit pages will be in the description down below. And if you're feeling generous and wish to help improve the quality of the channel, a link to our Patreon will be down in the description as well. It certainly isn't required, but it is appreciated. Also, please don't forget to show your support and hit those subscribe and share buttons, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.